My guests today are Peter O'Donoghue. He's the Chief Technology Officer for the Leidos Civil Group, and Lakshmi Ashok, the Vice President of Enterprise Service Management at Leidos. It's good to have you both with us today. And Lakshmi, we'll start you with the first question on the issue of multi-cloud. This is a word that we hear a lot of agencies use, and indeed they are multi-cloud users. How do you best define multi-cloud? Because I think that has some effect on how you go about managing multi-cloud.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me here, Tom. So I'll give you a couple of definitions of multi-cloud and what I use. So let me start with the Gartner definition. And Gartner is all about defining a set of services that run across multiple cloud platforms, and that's classified as multi-cloud. They've also done several studies, and they're now looking at about 76% of their constituents that have adopted multi-cloud. So it is in to stay for good. When I look at agencies and the way they adopt, right, my customers, so they adopt a little bit of services from different providers, SaaS included. So you have your CRM from Salesforce, for example, maybe. You have your time accounting systems. You have your financial systems that are SaaS. And then you have some PaaS, and of course you have the IaaS. You have the top 3 or 4 providers, right? So there is the AWSs, the Microsoft Azures, and the Googles. And what the agencies do is perhaps find the best application for each cloud and say, I want maybe my AI ML kind of related stuff to run on Google. I want my identity management system to run on Azure. And maybe I want to use my development environment within AWS. Further on, cloud has evolved to not just mean all this, but edge also. There is a lot of sensors out there, a lot of edge reporting devices that we need to consider when we talk about multi and hybrid cloud environments. I've also noticed from a trending perspective that the vendors, the CSPs, are now recognizing that cloud is not going to be at one data center. It can be at a data center within a customer environment. It can be in a desert. It can be on an airplane. And so you have the likes of Azure having Azure Stack. You have AWS with their outposts. And further on, the providers are also figuring out that people are going to use multi-cloud. They are not going to stick to single cloud for the most part. And so they've been putting out products like Google has Anthos that can be distributed everywhere. Azure has Arc, for example. And yet another progression is now the cloud providers want to play well with each other. So you have the Azures of the world providing interconnects to the Oracles of the world to enable seamless data transfer, for example, between applications and where the databases are stored. So I think considering all this, it's like a giant mesh of things is what I would consider multi-cloud.
Yeah, so the implication there is don't look at clouds as vendor, 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 but look at it as not so much what they have in common, but the services that differentiate. And that's really what it is you're dealing with in the multi-cloud environment.
Exactly.
And that's interesting, the idea that it doesn't have to be in a physical building in Ashburn or in Salt Lake City or something.
Yeah.
Peter, you want to comment further?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Lakshmi, hit the nail on the head, which is like each of the cloud providers, I think I guess the conventional way to think about cloud providers years ago was it's just somebody else's computer or somebody else's virtual machine. The truth is, I look at cloud today as it really just means a platform upon which I can digitally deliver mission and I can innovate really quickly. So we're seeing, little edges all the way up in the space station to thousands of feet under sea to, in deserts and in people's backpacks as they're performing the mission. So I think we're really still only getting started. I think the last time we were here, Tom, I think we said we were getting started. I think we're still kind of getting started. And part of it is Lakshmi used the term mesh. I see cloud becoming like this ubiquitous mesh upon which we can deploy machine learning algorithms, upon which we can actually hook augmented reality to have new perspectives to be able to deliver mission in ways that we never thought before. what does it makes it challenging, right? Why is it hard, right? So I think, historically, what we found is folks who've kind of come from that data center mindset, who've run network operation centers and cyber operation centers, who feel like they really got the tooling down, they got their processes down. The first thing they'll notice is as you go to public cloud, you notice that this we're not really here in Kansas anymore, right? And I think that was where we were probably 4 or 5 years ago. And what we found was folks were able to specialize their tooling to kind of take care of the first cloud that was off the first that they needed to engage and understand. Mm-hmm. What we found is a lot of those big thinkings and big learnings now have to be abstracted because they're not just using the single provider, they're using, provide another provider for their mission critical at scale databases, for their low code platforms, to integrate with their M365, et cetera. So now you actually have to come up with a way to have observability, to be able to manage, to govern, to secure, to assure compliance, to assure cost effectiveness across pretty diverse and heterogeneous environments. Some of these were actually designed to really work together, and each of the cloud providers actually really want you to kind of use them and primarily them. So that's kind of one of the key challenges. We find other key challenges would be, the sticker shock of when people go to the cloud initially. If you just simply move, lift and shift, what we're finding is if you don't optimize at all, it could end quite badly for you. You could actually wind up with a bit of cloud regret. So we find moving to the cloud, it is important to kind of keep an eye on how to cost optimize and how to build for resilience. There's a lot of things about moving to the cloud. There's opportunities. It's kind of both it's a double-edged sword. There's opportunities to do things you've never done before. Like other key challenges that we find, the complexities of the deal, and we're finding that time is also an issue, which is to say that if you think you understood all of the offerings and you could manage and govern and put in a service catalog, all the offerings of one provider in August of 2022, by the time December 22 rolls around or June of 23 rolls around, you're going to find that innovation keeps happening. So you really need to design to adopt, to design, to transform, continually kind of change and continually manage and govern. It's really important to be able to do that.
Yeah, so you've really moved the whole definition of the issue along quite a bit here, I think.
Absolutely.
To account for how the environments actually look in 2022, going into fiscal 2023 and beyond there. And so the implication I'm hearing is that you mentioned the word abstraction. That implies the need for some kind of a management layer that interacts with the complexity of all the varying service offerings. I mean, it used to be just people worried about their SLAs, but it seems like they need to worry about a whole lot more now relative than to just how much is going to cost, how much per month that they used to worry about. So maybe discuss some more of the challenges in terms of how you address them with that abstraction or that way of dealing with the complexity that is beyond anyone's ability to deal with point by point.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, so for me, complexity, Peter covered a lot of challenges with cloud operations, right? When it comes to cloud operations. But quite frankly, there's multiple personas that need to use the cloud, multi-cloud. And so you have the end users that are expecting a standard, consistent, great user interface, right? And so as you move into multi-cloud as an end user, I would want access to the innovations that Peter was talking about almost immediately. But I would also want the flexibility of saying, I want to pick this cloud for this, I want to pick this cloud for this. However, I want a standard user experience. I want to have a single sign-on, for example, for multi-cloud, right? I want to be able to reach those services quickly and have a fast turnaround. So that's another set of challenges with multi-cloud that we need to deal with. And another set of personas are the app developers, the app migrators. And so as we develop applications, let's face it, each app developer is very opinionated on what languages they use and what kind of pipelines they use, which gets difficult to do in a multi-cloud environment. So how do we lay out this abstract CI/CD pipelines that cater to not just individual clouds, but also cater to the individual needs of the app developers? Do we start working with multiple APIs? Do we work with mesh infrastructure? Do we work with Kubernetes? These are some of the challenges. But the most important challenge for me is intercloud data. How do you enable an effective data transfer between clouds? So you may be at a checkpoint one day where you need data within a split second, which means you've got to worry about latency and responsiveness. Or the next day you may be doing water treatment, you may be measuring pollution in the water. And for that you need accurate data, maybe not data at the very split second. And so these are things that start getting complex as we look at a multi-cloud environment. So now you were asking about what do you do to address some of this, right? So from a user perspective, let me always start, it's always the end user for me, otherwise there's no adoption of cloud if the end users are not happy. So we want to be able to architect these applications. We want to be able to provide them a consistent user interface. And here we're going to start introducing the concept of an Uber service catalog, right? Where users can pick and choose the kind of services they want. And the thing about that, however, is we've got to carefully balance flexibility and ease of use with security. Mm-hmm. So you've got to make sure that what you have in the catalog has good guardrails placed on it in terms of compliance. And the second point I would hit here is from a user perspective, make the access right. So think in terms of your identity access management, your single sign-on, but also think in terms of networking. So use SD-WAN, the latest, use your SASE, for example, from a user perspective. The second persona I would address here is the application developer. So have these concrete, ready-to-go infrastructure as code pipelines ready to deploy at any given time. Have playbooks to say what do you use when, right? And then the third is a well-architected enterprise data management system. So there is different courses for different horses, or the other way around. And so when do you typically use a data lake versus when do you use data proxies? When do you use federated data? Right? What kind of applications balance your applications that need quick response with maybe a federated data management system?
Sure.
Versus if you need truly accurate, consistent data, then you may want to look at a data lake, for example.
Or getting to that idea of edge computing and the need to distribute maybe local instances of limited data, even though the rest of it's still in the lake.
Yeah, you put your finger on a really important pattern that's emerged, which is the ability to kind of go fast, bring the cloud and innovation to the edge, while also training your algos, but also like storing and persisting your data, making it available for kind of enterprise use and enterprise decision making. Really important point, Tom.
Yeah, we do tend to build automations that not just look at root cause of what's going wrong, but more importantly, have the ability to predict what's going to happen based on a trend and hence avoid certain problems.
The predictive and analytical ability would apply to what's going to happen with your application, as well as the trends in maybe the mission that it is that the application is supporting. So two levels of that kind of predictive and technical and mission, let's say, correct?
Absolutely. From a user perspective, that's reflective of the mission, but also from a resiliency, and you talked about SLA earlier. So from an application perspective, tying that back into the SLAs to see that we are always resilient rather, and we adhere to the performance levels that we've signed up for.
Sure, you have the SLA should be more than an electric bill, I guess, every month coming into the agency. Yeah. And just a quick question for the application developers. They are likely to maybe mitigate, depending on their style, toward one set of services or another platform. But you mentioned intercloud data transfer. What about intercloud interoperability of the resulting applications? That might be something the agency needs, even if the developer doesn't care about it.
Yes, and here's where we start looking at APIs and service mesh and getting into those little SLAs between the applications itself. So these are things that we absolutely need to address in a multi-cloud environment.
So we need to tame the wild, wild west, you might say, the way the...
No, you're exactly right. I actually have a note here, which is like, how do we tame multi-cloud? Actually, it's Tom, you put your finger on probably the most important element of what the role of a systems integrator and a managed service provider is I think the extent to which and the rate at which innovation is happening. There's so much going on. To be able to assemble everything into a framework that is compliant, the government can understand, and to pay for, and actually to kind of be compliant with different regulations, the Anti-Deficiency Act, but also how to make sure that the oldies but goodies, such as like the risk management framework and service management and providing great quality of service and making sure that mission needs are actually being met. I think that's actually what's become really our key role is the great tamer of both this innovation and this complexity. I think that's what our key role is right now.
In other words, agencies have a need to get all of these compliance requirements kind of boxed up and tied with a ribbon so that they can get on with their operational and mission delivery needs, and user experience, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, a thread I would pull, which actually kind of is a little orthogonal to where Lakshmi was going, but it's really important, but it manifests is this idea that as you go to the cloud, a few things kind of inherently just break. Like your mindset in terms of the castle moat security model, but also your governance processes, like how you actually do change control release management, how you prove like changes in production, and also how you think about getting your ATO and your risk management framework adherence. Mm-hmm. Taking your old wine and try and take into the new bottle of cloud can be very difficult, right? And actually can be very frustrating. Really what you want to do is Lakshmi talked about automation, standing up platforms where you've got a high focus on automation of service management, really, really important. As you rework your governance processes, what we find is we're finding customers are kind of latching onto this idea of what we call the smart service catalog. So Lakshmi talked about being able to manifest all these new services. The secret behind that is as you go through the process of continually evaluating what the next service for evaluation and consideration and deployment is you're going to assure that they're compliant, you're going to make sure that you've got an ATO for it, you're going to make sure that you're confident, you're happy with the security posture, and you can actually put the right telemetry in to assure that the IT and the security operations folks actually have what they need to be able to operate all this stuff. And once you're done with that, you're going to manifest it in a service catalog that can be used in a self-service context. So that's actually the self-service catalog, or the smart catalog, is where the rubber meets the road. That's where this kind of great convergence of your augmented, renewed service governance processes kind of come into place, and your tech comes into place, so that folks who need to consume from the catalog, whether or not I'm an app developer or I'm an AI developer, they're able to kind of use that, but actually know that the CIO and the CISO actually have governed and approved that's actually ready for use. Really important point.
Right, because the ultimate goal of development is that ATO, so that you can, if you have this rapid sec DevOps environment and you're using the latest tools, you don't want to wait around for 9 months to get the ATO in the cloud while your mission is running.
Well, the mission doesn't wait for a 9-month governance process.
Right.
Exactly right.
They find other ways to do it.
Yeah.
One last thing I would add to it is architecting for resiliency in the cloud. So cloud's very different from your regular data center, we all know that. And you have your availability levels. You need to perhaps port applications or to different clouds at certain times during extreme conditions. Not every day, I hope. But there's several layers to do that. And so you have to carefully balance your application requirements to your architecture. So you've got the AZs, availability zones, you've got the regions, you've got the multi-regions, you've got the multi-cloud. And so thinking through the needs of your application and building out a resiliency architecture, you've got self-healing capabilities via automation. Mm-hmm. So all of this goes into making a well-architected, resilient framework. And that's something we need to give very careful thought to when we design for multi-cloud.
To kind of summarize this then, what you've described as complexity, but also the need to tame it and be able to get the mission done, get to that deployment of the application so you're actually getting work from all of these different components and layers. I guess my question is, and as you've indicated, a lot of automation has to happen here so that people can concentrate. Where does the automation level rise to, and what should be left over that takes the day-to-day management of the IT group that is making sure the cloud is delivering to users, to developers, and to clients and constituents?
Well, actually, that's a really good question. I would say if we teleport ourselves 3 or 4 years into the future, we're finding that automation, we're approaching the era of hyper automation. So the day is coming where the ticket automation, like a lot of the block and tackle of creating environments, spinning environments up, the approval, the governance thereof, investigating actually the operational condition and if there's faults, that actually already has become quite automated. Lakshmi used the term, the predictive and the use of artificial intelligence to actually kind of design for greater resilience and to be able to predict and to be able to deploy resilience kind of remediation patterns across clouds or within the cloud. We're not quite there yet, but that's actually going to happen. The role of people, I mean, this is almost like a truism though, is we're not automating people's jobs away. What we're finding is that people will always have a role in the higher order kind of functions, right? So whether or not it's like the deep dive in terms of root cause analysis and really understanding the patterns, or looking for fragments of kind of like breadcrumbs of what the heck happened in a multi-cloud context, or even to make the right decisions or to kind of implement the right governance and make sure that things are actually kind of aligning to the mission outcomes. People are always going to have a role in terms of the higher order functions. But I think, with automation, I think the lower value things that we've been doing over the years in terms of just spinning up an environment and ensure that things are operating and are actually healthy, I think we're close to being able to automate most of that away at this point in time. But it's interesting is that adage of the future is already here, it's unevenly distributed. I think that's especially true here. When I answer that question, I was thinking of probably the high water marks. I think the truth is there's a lot of folks who are actually on different parts of their journey as well. And, I think they all have to go through their own process by which they give up. Human touch doesn't necessarily mean governance or good practice, right? And I think folks are actually having to kind of come to terms with that and get their people trained and certified and actually kind of rewicker their processes to embrace automation.
Yeah, and I see this typically when we're doing the higher end processing using algorithms, AI, ML, right? So we're training the modules on whatever it is, whether it's record processing, whether it's figuring out fairness and ethics. And we always have a human in the loop at the beginning to say, hey, did this model do the right thing? Have we trained it well? And until the mission owners are satisfied that, oh yeah, I think the model's got it right and it's training itself even better than what a human could do, and then slowly we transfer over entirely to the automations. So that's the way we're doing. We never eliminate the human in the loop in the beginning. It takes time to get them trained and to get them to accept the level of automation.
That's true in the knock and the sock. What we find, to Lakshmi's point, is we can use algorithms to actually detect the issue, but generally best practice is use an algorithm to detect the issue. We actually have a human basically confirm that, hey, this is the right root cause, and here's the appropriate kind of remediation, and then over time you automate all that stuff. So what you don't want to have is you don't have bots throughout the enterprise that are actually automating and taking the wrong actions because nobody's supervising it. That's really an important point.
Yep.
All right, so a little machine work, a little people work, and maybe some help to get it all coordinated for the federal agencies.
Exactly right.
Services that enable all this, absolutely.
All right, well, thank you both very much. Some really rich discussion. Peter O'Donoghue is the Chief Technology Officer for the Leidos Civil Group, and Lakshmi Ashok, the Vice President of Enterprise Service Management at Leidos. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more of the Cloud Exchange.